In the liquid fuels area, you have a number of options right here. We just take a look at the liquid ones here, and I'll break those down into some of these families and groups and talk about them. So we have the kind of the gasoline family, and this is one we're very familiar with. Gasoline is loaded with a lot of energy, but it's also very hazardous, and you have to be very careful in using it because it is designed to very easily vaporize. You want it to vaporize in an engine through a carburetor or through fuel injectors so that it can explode in those cylinders. And so it's designed to do that. We also have some other liquid fuels like the lantern fuels, the Coleman fuel, that are still, they have the same problem because of the vapors that'll come off of them. Now, that makes them very useful, particularly in cold weather and winter in a stove, because it's much easier to get a white gas stove started when it's 40 below zero compared to a kerosene stove because it takes less heat to get it started and keep it going. And I know that because I've been using the white gas stoves at 40, 50 below zero, and I've also had the kerosene ones out there, and they are a real pain. So it has its place and it has its advantages, but you also have to understand the problems with them. And one of the problems with the gasoline type of fuels, whether it be the gasoline that we use in a car, that you can use unleaded fuels in lanterns and some of those things that are designed for it in the stoves, or it can just be the Coleman fuel. You never ever want to use them inside of a structure, inside of a house, inside of a tent, anything like that, because they produce copious amounts of carbon monoxide. And I'll come back to that a little bit more because that's a real safety issue along with the explosive issue that you have with the gasoline family. Now, I have white gas and gasoline that I store, and you don't have to understand that the white gas, which is naphtha, is what it is. It doesn't have all the additives in it that gasoline for the vehicles has in them. It will store very much, well, let's just say indefinitely. It'll store for a very, very long time. Won't run in a car very well because it doesn't have the additives in there. But in the stoves and the lanterns, you can use it that's been stored for many years. And so most of the time where I'm using the white gas fuel is in the cold in these stoves that we would use like in when we take our snow college, when we take people out. It's just a heck of a lot easier to use in the cold than any other kind of fuel. So in the little stoves and the bigger stoves, it works just great. And one of the things that doesn't work as well when in the extreme cold is these little propane stoves, because by the time it gets down to 20 below zero, they just about won't work. And then at 40 below zero, it won't vaporize enough that it can run. So here again, that's why we use the white gas because it still vaporizes very easily in these cold temperatures. So you'll see me using that in the in the winter time. That's what it's stored for. Now the other little thing that I like to mention to people, we have these lanterns and these stoves. The Coleman lanterns and stoves, or the equivalent of them. And many of them, they will say, well, you can use unleaded fuel in them, but I don't. I don't use the unleaded fuel because it has additives in it that, number one, the vapors coming off of it will be more hazardous than it will be with the naphtha fuels. And they also will foul the lanterns sooner. Now, they've redesigned them so that they don't foul as soon as they used to before they redesigned them, but still, the generator in here, the little thing that vaporizes the fuel, it'll clog sooner running on gasoline, the unleaded fuel. So I store for my lanterns and stoves that I'm going to use outside in the cold. I store the Coleman fuel, the white gas fuel, or the naphtha, whatever you want to call that. And of course, this is great for when we take on little trips where you're having these small camping stoves. It's very handy for that. Now, where you're going to store the gasoline, you want to have that for your generators and some of the other tools that you may want to operate. And you would want to have gasoline that has the additives in it that you can keep adding it year after year. And you can extend the life of that fuel 3 or 4 years, but eventually it breaks down. It does not have a real long-term storage because of all the additives, all the things they've done to it to make it run better in the engines and get more power out, but it also shortens its storage life. And you would find if you're trying to use the naphtha in our generators or on our cars, they won't run well at all. They don't like it. As a matter of fact, they're going to be low octane, and so they're going to have a tendency to knock and do damage to the engines. So that's why we store the gasoline. Now, another little trick on storing gasoline, if you want to have that stored for your engines, then what you really want to do is you would like to keep it in very airtight, so it doesn't have a vent on it. It wants to be underground so the temperature is doesn't fluctuate, and that's going to extend its life in there. And then if you put the additives to extend the life of the fuel, it'll last much better underground, stable temperature, and not allowing any oxygen to get into it. So sealed drums that are buried are going to store better than where you have it in a can that's out where it heats up and cools down, heats up and cools down. And there's some other problems with that. When I talk about kerosene, I'll mention that because that's a fuel you may want to store, but you have the same problem with water accumulation in gasoline. So let's go to the kerosene family. Now, the kerosene family, what you have is a fuel that a liquid fuel that doesn't evaporate as quickly. It doesn't make the explosive fumes around it. So it's a safer fuel in that regard. It's kind of smelly, and it will the lower grades of it. If you're getting it for like I'll say diesel fuel, it's really has a lot of smell to it, and it'll also stain things more at a greater extent than the K1. The K1 or 1K grade kerosene is a much cleaner one. And then you can go to the lamp oils in here, which is even a higher grade. It's been refined even more, but it's also more expensive. So trying to store the lamp oils, it's good, but it'll cost more. Now, using kerosene in the kerosene appliances like this stove that I have here or in lamps, it's okay indoors. Number one, you don't have the explosive issue. It isn't nearly as bad. It is kind of smelly and it is kind of sooty. And this is why when you had the spring cleaning, where the in the old days, my mother and my grandmother talked about once you got into spring, you had to go around, you wash the ceiling and the walls in there because they had a lot of soot in them from the kerosene, because the kerosene is kind of sooty. Even though you don't see the black smoke coming off of it, if you keep the wick trimmed properly, it's still going to be accumulating over time. So it's a dirtier fuel. You can use it for lighting, and we'll talk about this in the lighting area. Kerosene lamps, what's called the hurricane lamp like this, or the Aladdin lantern right here, and we'll talk about that when we get into the lighting area. Then we have the alcohol fuel area in here, and these are liquid fuels. It's relative safe and very little odor to them, but it's much more expensive is one of the challenges depending on how you buy it. You have the denatured alcohol. Now, this is the shellac thinner is what it is. That's denatured alcohol, and it's very expensive. This is going to be like 12, 13, $14 a gallon. You may have some of this is isopropyl alcohol here that you can buy in little bottles. I was able to get some drums of it like this, nice and clear. This is ethyl alcohol. This is isopropyl alcohol. And for burning, actually, the ethyl alcohol, the denatured alcohol like this, is actually better to burn indoors than the isopropyl because it has the aldehydes that come off of it, the esters. You're going to have a little less of those that are dangerous. But again, here it's more expensive. And this is sometimes the most useful place. People that have sailboats or ocean going smaller craft, a lot of them will use alcohol for their lighting and for their stoves because it has a good clean flame and doesn't have all the fumes off of it. Now here's an alcohol stove. This is a very good alcohol stove. This is the alcohol burner down here. It has this shield around them and then this pot that goes down inside of it. So it's a very efficient alcohol stove. Since the alcohol is quite expensive, then you want to, get most of the energy out of it that you can. Now, you're going to see and hear about these little alcohol can heaters using isopropyl alcohol, and you would put it in a toilet paper roll like this and put them in a can, and it'll burn and what have you. There's a lot of claims made about that of what you can do, and I just have an article that I would tell you you can go read this. I won't spend time right here because I want to give you a little bit of a reality check on what these little alcohol can heaters will do. On my website, you can go to my website, which is jimsway.com, go to the library section, then to the handout where this little green button is here, and then go into the supplies area. And you'll find in there one that has this alcohol can heater right here. It's in the handouts area where you can get it. There's also other free information like this right here that you can get on my library. So I'd encourage you to go there and download some things. There's a lot of things in the free area, and there'll be other classes and things put up there. Now, in the vegetable oil area, we have vegetable oils and or olive oil. That's a very good one to use. And you would want to have some of this in storage, both for the fatty acids for you to use in your diet, but you can also turn it into a lamp. And this is the most ancient of all lamps, as far as I know, was using vegetable oils and or animal fats, as in seal blubber or caribou fat, which I've used seal oil lamp type things in the igloos and things like that. So anyway, let's make an oil lamp. Now I'm going to talk about this just very briefly here, and I'll cover it in greater depth when we get into the lighting area, because you can make an olive oil lamp or a vegetable oil lamp. It looks like this, gives you this nice little flame, and here again, I'll go through that in greater depth. Now, one of the things that's mentioned, there was a guy on the internet that was promoting using olive oil rather than in your kerosene lamp, rather than using that nasty, uh, you know, polluting kerosene. You don't want to do that. And he went on about using olive oil in your kerosene lamp. Well, I put this up here. What's the truth really? You need to test your sources. And when this guy was giving that thing on YouTube in there, I'm going like, I don't think so, because I understand the difference between kerosene and olive oil and the problem with them. And so K equals I times E. This is information multiplied by experience. This guy had a theory, and a man with experience is never at the mercy of a man with a theory. Okay, I put that down there wrong. I didn't write that right. I'll have to fix that. Anyway, a man with experience is never at the mercy of a man with a theory. Let me just change that right now here so I get this right in here. I don't want to make mistakes like that. TH. Okay, did I spell theory right? I hope I did. Anyway, wait a minute. I got it. Yeah, theory. That looks like right to me. Anyway, if I can read it, it's okay. Now, what I did was, and I'll go through this when we get to the olive oil, when we get to the lamps in there, I'll go through it in a little more depth because it just doesn't work. In your hurricane lamp or your kerosene lamp, the olive oil, vegetable oil doesn't work. Well, one of the things about using these vegetable oils, if you have vegetable oil, olive oil, or something like that that has got old, it's getting kind of rancid, you can still turn that into a lamp. So I actually save some of our old oils. I keep them saved so that I can turn them into either a fuel that I can burn for starting fires, or I can use it in a lamp like this. Now it won't smell as good. The best smelling is the olive oil. It has kind of a nutty smell to it when it's a good non-rancid olive oil. If it's gone rancid, it has another little bit of an off odor to it, but by golly, you still get light out of it. So you may want to consider, if you have oil that's been used for deep fat frying, or if you have olive oil that you've had in the cabinet too long and it starts to smell a little bit off, you don't want to cook with it, save it anyway, because I could use it in a lamp. So I save old oils and things like that. Okay, let's get into some more of the liquid fuels in here that we want to talk about, that we might use for cooking, and we're going to go into a little more depth here why you want to have them. Now, we've talked about having the gasoline and keeping it tightly closed in there, and about storing gasoline. You don't want to have very much in your garage or in your house. So in an outbuilding, as would you'd store it, because if it does get a leak and you have some vapors in there, I'd rather burn down my shed than I would burn down my house. If you have the Coleman fuels and they have this little metal seal in here, don't break that seal, because now that can is airtight and it can't pull in moisture from the air. And that's one of the enemies of storing the liquid fuels, the gasoline, in a container like the gas cans we have to go to our car, because after a while they get contaminated with water. And this is what happens with alcohol and or kerosene once you break the seal on them. Now, when we take a look at this can right here, when you're going to be storing kerosene, if you have these cans of kerosene, number one, you want to store them off the floor. You don't want to break the original seal that's in them, because these things, they have a little cap down in here that pulls out, and it is sealed until you break that seal in there. This can is airtight. And so don't crack them open, because what happens after you crack them open, or if you have a one like this where you have a good gasket, you can keep it tight. I have kerosene stored in these 1 gallon cans like that. But what happens is that over time, once you've opened this seal in here, when the fuel heats up and there's a little bit of vapor coming out, and this, even though you have the screw-on lid, they're going to get a little bit of vapor that's going to go out because it was raised in temperature. And then what happens is when it cools back down again, then it's going to draw a partial vacuum in here, and that's going to pull some air in. Now, what comes in with the air is a little bit of humidity. This is why I talk about keep that seal in there, keep this tight seal in here. Don't open this, because once you open it, you're going to start getting water in your liquid fuel through this change in temperature up and down. And see this water that's right here? This is what actually came out of this can right here when I got down to the end in here. This is what came out. It had all this water in here, and then it's rusting the inside of the can, and it'll eventually rust the can through so that it would actually leak from the inside. It'll rust through you, and then when you have the new cans, you want to store them up off the floor so you don't have moisture from the bottom. But if you've opened that can, this moisture that's getting pulled in from the air, it's going to eventually rust out this can, and that can will actually leak on you. Now, one of the things that you can do, because maybe you've had a can that's been opened, it's had gasoline in it, and it's been opened because you had to open it, and you can strain out the water. This is a trick that pilots use. They're bush pilots and things like this, where they've stored fuel in drums and all, and that's using a funnel that has a little felt insert in it right here. This is a felt insert that goes down inside of that, or you can make your own with a felt hat. And what happens is when you take the fuel, the kerosene or the gasoline, and remember that water is heavier and it'll settle to the bottom in here, so you can be pouring off all this clean gasoline or kerosene or white gas off the top. But then when you get down to the bottom of that drum where the water may be, you've wetted this felt with the gasoline or kerosene. And since gasoline, kerosene, and water don't mix, what happens is now then in this funnel right here, the water will bead up on top because this thing is impregnated with the kerosene or gasoline in there, and it'll just bead up on top and won't go in. So you're not going to be dumping water into your fuel tank. So that's a little trick that you need to remember. And that's why I keep these old felt hats. And every now and then, if I find some felt, I can be making a water separator for my stored gasoline or white gas or kerosene. Now, in the case of the alcohol fuels, the water will actually mix with the alcohol. In fact, when you have these alcohols like this denatured, it's not 100% alcohol because it's very hungry to absorb water. And so you'll find these will be around 90%, which would be 180 proof, but 90% alcohol and 10% water in here. The isopropyl alcohol, when you read them, it'll say like it's 60% or 70% because the rest of it's water because it's hungry for water. And you can only get the alcohols distilled to about 90%, and then you have to use a different process to get it down to anhydrous alcohol. And by the way, the gasoline additives that take the water out of your fuel lines in the winter that you want to dump in there, what they are is they are the anhydrous alcohol, either the methyl alcohol, ethyl alcohol, or isopropyl alcohol, because what they do is they then mix with the water, and now then it can be mixed in a little more with the fuel so that it'll both not freeze in the lines, but it also can pass through into the fuel system and be actually just kind of burned. If you're going to store the olive oil or vegetable oils, it's a good idea to take your chest freezer and in the bottom of the freezer, put your cans of oil in there and freeze it because it'll stabilize it and it'll store longer. Now, by the way, these alcohol little can heaters like this, they gel that in there, and it's actually very corrosive. And here's one of these that I had after, I don't know, 10 or 12 years. What it actually did, it just ate through this can, and all the alcohol is gone and evaporated out. I just have some rust in there. So just be aware of that. If you're storing some of these little heat in the can kinds of things, after a number of years, there may not be anything in there because it's eaten its way through. So storage life is a problem with them.